What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Gooner channel. And what a day yesterday was in the Premier League. Excitement, goals, shock results. Manchester City losing when I don't think anyone really expected them to a Wolverhampton Wanderers team who've played really well this season and not got their awards, but they did yesterday. And so with the last game of the day being a top of the table or near top of the table clash between two as yet unbeaten teams in Tottenham Hotspur, rejuvenated under Big Ange, and Liverpool, who, despite expectations, really have turned up this season. And it was a game watched by millions around the world, a further chance to showcase just why the Premier League is the best league in the world. And, well, we've got to talk about it. Before we talk about yesterday's game, I want to go back to 2001, which is the first time I remember having serious and heated debates with people who were convinced that the only way that football could advance was to introduce technology that other sports had started to introduce. With the FA Cup final between Arsenal and Liverpool, in the very early stages of the game, Thierry Henry's shot is kept out by Henshaw in goal. Well, he wasn't in goal, but he might as well have been because he handballed the ball around and it wasn't spotted by any of the officials. A penalty wasn't given. The game went on. In the 72nd minute, Ljungberg put us ahead. Everybody thought that was it. We were a much better team than Liverpool at the time. But Michael Owen, well, it was a great turnaround from Liverpool, but it started a discussion point, as I said, which is that if we'd had technology, if we'd had a VAR watching the game, they could have quite quickly let the referee know that there was indeed a handball which prevented the goal going in, and it would have been a penalty, and presumably the result could have been different. It might not have been, but certainly my concern at the time in this, and I seem to be a lone voice amongst my friends, was that the problem with introducing technology into the game was that it would slow the game down. At what point would you, for example, if you didn't see an event happening on the pitch, at what point could you stop the game because somebody in a VAR room tells you that something has happened? It would never cross any of our minds that the introduction of technology would be for anything other than the attempt to reduce the amount of human error in our game, which is a good thing. Wherever you can eliminate human error, it's better. But yesterday in the game between Tottenham and Liverpool, Diaz scored in the 33rd minute. And to the naked eye and everyone watching, it looked like the offside that was given immediately afterward would be overturned because the image they flashed up showed quite clearly that Diaz was onside. There were no lines shown on the VAR replay. There was nothing to indicate that we were wrong, but quite inexplicably, it was given as offside. Minutes later, Son scores to put Tottenham 1 ahead. Then there's an incident where, despite on the field the referee not seeing the challenge by Jones as a red card, the VAR team are wide awake and they immediately let the referee know that he has to have another look at it. He goes to look at it. The first image he sees is a freeze frame, which makes the incident look uncontrovertibly like a bad challenge, and he changes his mind and sends off Jones. Now, it's entirely subjective at this point. For me personally, I don't see any intent to injure the player. He goes for the ball, his foot travels over the ball into Bissouma, and it is a bit of a horror show if you freeze it at that point. But if you don't take into consideration whether he intended to do it or not, then, well, it is a red card. But if the intention is not there, now, this is the sort of thing that VAR will never solve, because you can watch it 100 times and I can watch it 100 times and we may not agree. And I can live with that. There are always going to be decisions in football that go against you. But if there's one thing that VAR is supposed to be able to tell you, it's the clear and objective truth of whether or not someone was offside or not. So when the game carries on and then there's another sending off, and this time for Diego Jota's 2 challenges, the first of which under no circumstances should have been a yellow card. It's not even clear to me, watching it dozens of times since, that he actually makes any meaningful contact, and he certainly isn't intending to. His second challenge is a yellow card, so he does get 2 yellow cards where he should probably only have 1, and pull down to 9 men, still play fantastically well. And then it's an absolute disaster for Matip with a late own goal in the 97th minute. But this isn't all, but you know all of this. What is at stake here now is VAR's reputation, because after the game, having seen the image over and over again, it's impossible to understand how VAR, anyone seeing that in slow motion, replay, or even in real time, could honestly have thought. But for me, it was a challenging one, because sometimes to the naked eye, things can look on or offside when calibrated machinery looks at can be proven one way or the other. Goal line technology, for example, has been a fantastic introduction to the game, because there's no arguing whether a ball crossed the line or not if you're using sensitive equipment to measure it. After the game, PGMOL released a statement saying that there had been significant human error. And I don't still know what's happened. But Darren England, the person in charge of VAR yesterday, has been relieved of duties, and his assistant has as well. What seems to have happened is that when asked to review the offside decision on field, they accidentally said that it had been checked when it hadn't been, and then presumably not wanting to look silly, decided they weren't going to say anything. Now, this is mind-blowing to me, because the only point of having them in that room is so that they can measure things objectively. If they're going to make a mistake, if they're going to accidentally say they've checked something when they haven't, it's mind-boggling, because the world can see when they've made a mistake. There's no point to keep saying, as they have done significantly over and over again, like they did for the goal that Brentford scored against us when they forgot to check one of the stages of play for offside, so they didn't see it. They consistently argue that they aren't given enough time to do these things. Take a second longer. The game's already stopped. Take a second longer. I thought Jurgen Klopp's post-match interview was unbelievable, because for what this might have cost his team, the effort they put into those 97 minutes, the performance from his team and never giving up and almost snatching an incredible draw out of that game, is to lose all of that because somebody in a room accidentally pressed a button that says the check had been confirmed when it hadn't been, and didn't have the fortitude to admit that they'd made a mistake, is shocking and cannot be made right by an apology. So here we are now with VAR. Up until now, despite all of the disappointments in it as a system, for slowing the game down, for making it impossible to celebrate goals when they go in because something might have happened that you didn't see with the naked eye, for all of the changes that have come, for the fact that we talk about VAR every single week, the one thing we've been able to rely on is that when they say something's offside, having the images in still and the calibration of the cameras to work out exactly where everyone is on the pitch at the time of the pass means that whether you like it or not, and I'm talking to you Man United fans who seem to think that they can argue offsides even when it's been proven afterwards that it was, Garnacho's goal for example, or Rashford's ball that went over the line, for all of the people that are complaining about those things, the rest of us laugh because we know that there's no point in arguing, it's a fact. But now we are entering into an era where even when a decision's given, even when you know that it should be a clear-cut decision, you can't trust it anymore because there's a human being at the end of it. Two human beings at the end of it. Now, Lee Mason was relieved of duties after the shit show against us in the Brentford game. Brighton had letters of apology. In fact, PGMOL had an inquest into their own performance last season and found that on 6 occasions they'd got it wrong. What is this going to mean for the game? Now, last season, Man City won the league quite handsomely in the end because, well, Arsenal fell apart at the wrong time. But what if we hadn't fallen apart in that way? What if the league had been won by Manchester City by 1 clear point or goal difference? How much would that mistake at Brentford have cost them? Brighton might not have made it into the European positions they did because of the fact that against Crystal Palace, a penalty was not given. Against Brighton on 2 occasions. They had 2 independent games where they received letters of apology. A letter of apology is insufficient. So what do we do about this now? There is an increasing call for us to do away with VAR, and I don't think that's likely. I tell you what really isn't acceptable at this point. It's the fact that when things go wrong, the inquest is undertaken by the very team that don't seem able to properly use VAR. I'm not sure this happens in any other leagues. It is about time that we took it for granted that the very people who keep making these inexplicable decisions, inexplicable mistakes, are not the people responsible for the inquest into them. And I think, look, my final point on this is VAR is not broken. VAR is working. VAR was working yesterday. It's just whether you choose to use it or not. If two people are having an argument about how long something is, and there's a third party with a tape measure, and you ask them to intervene and they say they've measured it, but they haven't, that's worse. It would be better if we weren't using it. The League Cup games, just this midweek, that all went pretty damn well without too many points of discussion that followed matches that were won, was played without VAR. And that's a problem as well, because I can't be the only person who watched and found myself immediately not celebrating our goal against Brentford until VAR had intervened, and then remembering there was no VAR. It took me back to a time where when a goal was given, you just celebrated it. Sometimes rightly, sometimes wrongly. VAR needs to be in the hands of people who will be responsible for using it correctly. And if last season's inquests into the 6 occasions where it was misused has not changed anything, and this season looks even worse, if every single week we are having to discuss whether VAR is worth having or not, then there is a fundamental problem with it. And the fundamental problem with it is the exact problem it was introduced to get rid of. It's human error. It's not good enough to have human error be the cause of problems like yesterday's. The very least we should expect from this result is an understanding that VAR needs to be investigated by an external body. And furthermore, and this is a change I think is drastically overdue, it should not be punishable for a manager like Jurgen Klopp yesterday to point out what the rest of us can see objectively with our own eyes, and that is that this is not good enough. The referee had a shocker, but largely because he was encouraged to have a shocker by VAR. But for the referee on the pitch to have a shocker, that's not new in football. That's just how it goes. That's what happened to us in 2001. But for the referee, his assistant referee, and people whose only job it is to sit in a room and watch something back and use technology to determine objective facts, for them to switch off or fall asleep at the wheel and then have only themselves to investigate their own problems, is absolutely not good enough. I don't know where Liverpool are going to finish this season. I think given that the fight and how well they played yesterday shows that they are going to be back there or thereabouts this season. And any neutral watching that match will feel nothing but sympathy for them and Matip, who really didn't deserve to score an own goal in the way he did. But that's football. That happens. There's nobody else's fault. VAR needs to be changed in these 2 fundamental ways. Firstly, inquiries into what went wrong should not be done by the people who've made the mistakes. And second of all, it is freedom of speech time. If a manager is not allowed to say what he really thinks about something because referees and officials are a protected species, give me one good outcome of a group of people continuously having no comeback for the mistakes they make. It is absolutely not possible for me to see how we can continue on with VAR in this fashion without something changing. Because, you know, if you had faith in the VAR room before, if Howard Webb saying last season that there were going to be fundamental overhaul of how things are done and investigation to make sure they don't happen again, if it's happening again every week this season, then I'm afraid it has to be taken out of his hands altogether. And to be honest with you, would anyone miss it if we took it out? Are we better off now than we were in 2001? I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, by the way. VAR, as far as I'm concerned, signed its own death warrant yesterday. Proved it's not fit for purpose. Not while human error is still possible. I don't need technology to eliminate human error and then find that it doesn't work because of human error. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Till I see you again. Be lucky! Well, luckier than Liverpool anyway.